This is Josh Bycer from GameWisdom.com. I hope you enjoyed this Critical Thought, your daily discussion on game design. Welcome to today's Critical Thought. As always, before we get started, thank you to currently 978 subscribers here on YouTube. If you're enjoying the content, be sure to like and subscribe and help us get to 1,000. For today's Critical Thought, I'm expanding on my previous post about event-driven game design, which should be going up right here as we're talking. But instead of just reiterating what we mentioned there, I want to actually expand and cover a few new topics for this Critical Thought. Specifically more about the philosophy or options you have when designing events. But as always, let's make sure everyone's on the same page first. Event-driven game design is the concept of adding in situations or events that will affect or change the player's actions or strategies. Think of them as monkey wrenches, chance cards in Monopoly, anything like that. When we're referring to event-driven game design, we're usually talking about strategy, 4X, grand games, or open-ended titles where things are supposed to be different each time you play. Now from the post, I brought up three kinds of events, small, medium, and large, and they basically determine the duration or the impact. So let's say a small event would be, I stub my toe on a rock and I lose 5 points of health. A medium event would be, I slam my kneecap into a coffee table, I have -3 agility for 3 turns. A large event would be, I get hit by a bus and now I'm in a full body cast, out of action for 30 turns, something like that. Now, with event-driven game design, we need to quickly talk about what are and what aren't examples. What would not be an example of event-driven game design for this post would be something that's very specific or locked to a single experience or area. The dogs crashing through a window in Resident Evil would not be an example event for what we're talking about. It is an event in the grander scheme of things, but when we're referring to event-driven game design, we're talking about things that can happen at any moment or under basically very generalized conditions to keep the player guessing. The problem with the Resident Evil example is that it's tied to one specific area, one specific outcome, and it's going to play the same every time. Now, designing events is very tricky. They have to be specific enough that the player knows they exist. So just having my stock prices drop 30 points all of a sudden is not an example of an event. But they can't be so specific that they can only occur under a very specific situation. And that could be something like, let's say if I have 30 pieces of steel, 20 pieces of rubber, and 10 pieces of gold, that a wizard will pop up and turn all my food into chickens. I know, it's not exactly a event that makes sense, but that would be an example of something that's so conditional that it's very unlikely that it will actually pull off. Or it's so specific that there's no real guesswork or things to really change with the event. Now, good event design, like I said, can be a little bit tricky, and there's a few areas of this I want to talk about in the coming minutes. But one of the things you want to avoid with event-driven game design is having something that becomes repeatable or something exploitable. And I'll give you an example. Let's say I am playing a city builder, and there's 5 different kinds of food resources, including chickens. And there's an event that says, if I have 50 chicken resources or more stockpiled, there's a 20% chance every minute that, or let's say every 5 minutes, that there will be an event that triggers that says, chickens stop producing eggs, chicken resource production is now slowed by 300%. The problem with this event is that it's too specific and it's too built around being exploited or being watched. I know that if I immediately go over those 50 chicken resources, that this event could happen. So I could keep it at 49. Or better yet, how about I just don't use chicken? Just ignore that event altogether. And if you can min and max around an event, that's not a good event. A better alternative would be, let's say that event could happen with any of the food resources. Let's make it a 5 or 10% chance over 10 or 20 minutes, and it could happen to any one of those food types. And the advantage of this is that it allows players to either dodge a bullet or plan them or train them to adapt with multiple food resources. And instead, it keeps things from being predictable. And that is the magic word here. Events are designed to keep the game from becoming stale. The same 5 players should not be able to play your game and have the exact same play if you're going for event-driven game design. Another thing that would not be an example event would be sort of like when the zombies or those green guys pop up in Minecraft every night. Again, the reason is that this is something that is a set circumstance that the player can plan for. Now, with that said, there are a few interesting ways we've seen event-driven game design evolve over the years. The first would be faction or civilization or unit-specific events. This is when they basically become a way of adding more flavor to sides in a strategy game. Let's say we have an insect race in a 4X game, and one of their possible events could be there is a larva season impact, and what happens is populations are now going to decrease by, let's say, 50 for 10 turns, and then will explode for 120% in 25 turns. Again, this would be something that is specific because it is linked to the specific race, but it's still generalized because you don't know when it's going to happen, and that will, of course, put a monkey wrench into your plans. Like, let's say you're planning to go to war, but now everyone is now laying eggs, so you can't really do much, or breeding that way. Now, with these kinds of events, again, you can really have some fun, and this is where a good game designer can get really creative with coming up with variety of events. My mouth just completely dried out there. Now, another way we can go to get a little bit lower level would be the kind of design of chain events. This is where event A will produce event B, which will then produce event C, which will then go to this major thing over here. Clockwork Empires is an example of this, and how if people get too scared that they'll form a cult, or they'll get too insane, they'll create a cult, which if the cult stays too long, they'll start performing rituals. If the rituals go on too long, then demons and eldritch creatures will come and kill us. The problem with chain events like this is that it's still very much locked to specific events. If chain event 1 doesn't happen, then chain event 3 will never happen. A more interesting alternative would be, let's say that chain 1 affects chain 2, and then chain 2 has, let's say, 3 or 4 different outcomes. 1 and 2 will cause chain event number 3, but 3 and 4 could, let's say, start a completely different event. Again, you want to keep things from becoming stale. As long as things are kept varied and the player is always guessing or never able to really mitigate these events, you know you're doing a good job. Now, one of the things we talked about in the other piece that I linked before is that you need to have all 3 kinds of events: small, medium, and large. If you just have small and medium, they're usually not enough to change the game. In Prison Architect, for instance, if I get, let's say, an earthquake, if I build my place big enough or I have enough fences, that event's mitigated. Now, with large events, this is where we can easily segue into a completely different critical thought, but we'll see if we can cover this in the next few minutes. Large events are the game changers. When you play one of these, the game should not go back to the status quo at all for the remainder of the play. If small and medium events are like tossing pebbles and rocks into a river, the large event is throwing a manatee in that river and watching things just go all over the place. For fans of tabletop games, large events can easily be seen when players play like massive event cards, things that will change their strategies or change the rules of the game going forward. Let's imagine a 4X strategy game, and a large event could be a wizard shows up and decrees iron is forbidden and turns all the iron into the world into rust. From this point forward until the end of the game, no player can make use of iron for anything. Anything at all that use iron is not available for the remainder of this play. Now that would be a large event and would change how things go. Now the challenge with large events is you have to be careful about their implementation. For instance, you really don't want to have more than one or maybe two large events in a single play, depending upon how big you make them. For instance, let's say after that steel event, let's say now the wizard pops back and says, oh, now I'm going to remove all wood from the game. Now no one can build anything. And at that point it becomes more like, sort of like that chaos that we sometimes see in roguelikes, where everything that could go wrong does, and now the player's screwed. In grand strategy games or event-driven game design, you want to avoid events simply being game overs. Like, a dragon awakes and kills everyone, and there's a 2% chance this happens, and then the game ends. It's not an exciting event. You want events that the player can adapt to, that will change the game, but at the same time that they can't, it's not so bad that the player just says, you know what, reload the game, I don't want to deal with it. And there are many different ways we can talk more about large events. What's interesting is how this kind of event-driven game design has really become popular with games as a service, as a model. Paradox Interactive, with their grand strategies, whenever they release a new expansion or a DLC that adds new systems and rules, they also add events that are tied to those systems and rules, or even maybe just some general events that can happen over the game. What that means is for someone who plays Crusader Kings 2 vanilla, is a whole lot smaller compared to someone who plays Crusader Kings 2 with all the expansions. But keep in mind, Crusader Kings 2 by itself is still a very, very big game. But this is a great way of adding more to the game, and when it comes to event-driven game design, the more the better. The bigger the pool of events, the greater the chance a player is going to not have the same things happen to them. And we'll probably wrap things up in the next few minutes, because if we don't, we could easily go on for a lot longer. But to sum things up, event-driven game design are your chance cards, your monkey wrenches. These are the ways to keep your game from becoming stale. If you're building a game that's meant to be replayed, especially those that are open-ended in nature, you're going to have to think about events and event-driven game design. From the posts, this is one topic that we won't be able to get into today, but event-driven game design is usually handled by an AI director. Something behind the scenes that decides what events to play and when, and will usually watch the game and try to determine the best event to use. This is also where the idea of chain events or conditional events will come in, so that the AI director will know, okay, so the player was hit with A, B, and C. These events have been triggered, so we can throw now chain or conditional event D. If it hasn't been triggered, then when it's trying to decide, it will know, okay, the conditions have been met, so I'm not going to look at this event while I'm deciding on what to do next. And again, that's another topic right there. But for those of you watching this, I'm curious, what do you think about event-driven game design? Especially for those of you who enjoy the 4X and grand strategy games from Paradox, Stardock, you name it, any of the big name players there. And also, can you think of good examples of event-driven game design in non-strategy games? I didn't mention this earlier, but Darkest Dungeon has added in event-driven game design in the form of town events. But I haven't played enough of it with the new patch to really use that or talk about that in today's post. But for those of you who have, let me know what you think below. But otherwise, we're going to end things here. Once again, if you enjoyed things, be sure to like and subscribe and all that good stuff. Once again, I'm Josh Bycer from GameWisdom.com, where we examine the art and science of games. Thank you for watching today's Critical Thought, and come back tomorrow here and on GameWisdom.com for more great content. And as a special note, this week's Perceptive Podcast has gone up on the site. It's my interview with OmniDrone about making a mobile MOBA game. So be sure to check that out as well, and I'll catch you all tomorrow and possibly later with a stream. Take care. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoy it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and of course share with your friends. It always helps out. For daily posts on all manner of game design and industry topics, check out game-wisdom.com. To support the site and everything that I do, be sure to check out the Patreon campaign. If we can hit goals, it will mean more content for everyone to enjoy, and I'll be able to support myself and my household. If you want to follow me, you can find me on Twitter at GW for updates throughout the day and random thoughts from me. And lastly, you can find me on Twitch right over there at GW for daily streams most nights around 10 Eastern. Thanks again for watching the video, and be sure to check out more great content coming to the Game Wisdom channel real soon.